"Get on all fours, fat girl," Mountain Man barked, but he was teaching her to survive. "Get on all fours, fat girl," the Mountain Man barked, his voice echoing through the mist-filled forest. Penelope Ashford froze, mud clinging to her trembling hands. For 3 days she had been lost in the wilderness, starving and terrified. Now this wild-eyed stranger stood over her broad as a bear, dressed in animal hides, bow slung across his back, and he had just commanded her like she was an animal herself. I beg your pardon," she stammered, her Boston accent breaking. "If you want to live, you'll do as I say," he growled. "Down, now." And that was how the only daughter of a wealthy merchant found herself crawling through the wet leaves of Wildwood Mountain, her fine silk skirt torn to rags, following a man who looked more beast than human. His name was Ezra Mackenzie, though the few settlers who had glimpsed him called him Wolf. He'd left the civilized world years ago, some said, after killing a man. Others whispered it was because his wife had died in the city's filth. Either way, he wanted nothing to do with people, until he found her. When Penny collapsed from exhaustion beside a fallen log, Wolf knelt beside her and pressed a flask of water to her lips. "Drink," he ordered. She coughed, the cold water shocking her throat. Why are you helping me?" "Because you'll die before sunset if I don't." That moment, half mercy, half command, changed both their lives. As night descended over the forest, the city girl who had never so much as lit a fire would begin the hardest lesson of all, learning how to survive under the watch of the man everyone feared, and the man who would one day love her. By morning, mist blanketed the forest like smoke over a battlefield. Penny woke inside a crude shelter made of pine branches and bark. Her clothes were still damp, her hair tangled, her body aching from cold and hunger. She blinked against the dim light and saw him, the man who had saved her, crouched near the fire, roasting something on a sharpened stick. "Where am I?" she croaked, her voice weak. "Wildwood Ridge," Ezra replied without looking at her. His voice was low, rough, and calm, like the sound of distant thunder. "You're lucky I found you before the wolves did." Penny shuddered. "Wolves?" He glanced at her, one corner of his mouth curving slightly. "Real ones, not me." When he handed her a piece of meat, she hesitated. "What is it?" "Rabbit. You want to live, you eat." The smell made her stomach twist with both fear and hunger. She took a small bite. It was tough but warm. She chewed slowly, her eyes never leaving him. His face was hard, sunburned, framed by a thick beard. He looked nothing like the men she knew in Boston. No polished boots, no pressed collars, no polite words. "I don't belong here," she whispered. "No," he said bluntly, tossing another stick into the fire. "You don't. But the forest doesn't care where you came from. It only cares if you can survive." Penny's throat tightened. "I tried to find the road back to the town. I thought I was going the right way." "You weren't," he interrupted. "You've been walking in circles for 2 days. City folk always do." Something in his tone, not cruel, just factual, stung more than any insult. "Then why didn't you just leave me?" she asked quietly. Ezra finally looked at her. His eyes were deep brown, sharp, but not unkind. "Because I buried enough people up here already. Didn't need another ghost haunting my woods." Silence hung between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the wind through the pines. Over the next hours, Penny learned just how different this world was from everything she'd known. Her fancy boots were useless in the mud, her silk skirt tore with every step, and her delicate hands bled from thorns. Ezra didn't soften his words or slow his pace for her. "Keep up," he warned as they climbed a rocky slope. "I'm trying," she gasped. "Trying doesn't keep you alive out here. Doing does." When she slipped and fell, he was beside her in an instant, grabbing her wrist with a firm grip. For a moment, she met his gaze up close, the kind of look that said he'd seen death, loss, and more loneliness than any man should. "Don't give up," he said, his voice quieter now. "That's how the forest wins." That night, as rain began to fall again, Penny huddled by the fire in his rough-built cabin, a simple structure of logs, stone, and animal hides. Ezra moved silently through the shadows, hanging her wet clothes near the flames. "Rest," he said. "Tomorrow I start teaching you how to stay alive." She met his eyes. "You mean you're not sending me back?" He looked at her for a long time before answering. "You wouldn't make it 5 miles in that storm. Until it clears, you're staying here." He turned away, but she saw something flicker behind his stoic mask. Not annoyance, but a reluctant sense of responsibility. And for the first time since getting lost, Penny felt a spark of safety, fragile, unfamiliar, but real. The storm raged for 2 days straight. Rain pounded the roof of the cabin like drumbeats, and the wind howled through the trees. Penny stayed near the fire, wrapped in a blanket made of fur that smelled of pine and smoke. Ezra came and went silently, always returning with something wood, meat, or herbs she couldn't name. He was a man of few words, but every movement had purpose. He mended traps, sharpened knives, and stirred the fire with the calm focus of someone who had long ago learned to depend only on himself. Penny tried not to be a burden. She swept the floor, boiled water, and even offered to help cook. But when she accidentally spilled the pot of stew over the fire, sending steam and sparks into the air, she froze in horror. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I didn't mean to—" Ezra just sighed, grabbed his coat, and said, "Come on. Where are we going?" "To fix your mistake. You want to eat tonight? You'll learn to hunt." Penny blinked at him. "Hunt? I can't kill anything." "You'll learn," he said firmly, handing her a small bow. "Out here, either you learn or you die." They trekked through the dripping woods, the air thick with the smell of wet leaves. Ezra showed her how to move quietly, how to place her feet on moss instead of dry twigs, and how to listen, really listen to the rhythm of the forest. "Close your eyes," he told her. "Tell me what you hear." Penny hesitated, then obeyed. "The rain? The trees? Something moving?" "Good," he said softly. "That's a rabbit. Downwind 50 yards. Don't move too fast, or it'll be gone before you breathe twice." Under his guidance, she learned to draw the bow, clumsy at first, trembling with effort. The string snapped against her wrist, and she hissed in pain. Ezra stepped closer, his hand covering hers. "Like this," he said, his breath warm against her ear. "Anchor your elbow. Feel the weight. Don't fight it. Let it flow." For a heartbeat, the world fell away. Only the sound of rain, the tension of the bow, and the closeness of him. She loosed the arrow and missed completely. Ezra chuckled. "You scared it, at least. That's progress." Penny laughed, the first real laughter she'd managed in days. By the time they returned, soaked and empty-handed, she was shivering but smiling. "I failed." "No," Ezra said, tossing her a blanket. "You learned. Failure's just practice with a bruise." That night, he gave her the last of the dried meat without saying a word. When she realized what he'd done, she protested, "You need this more than I do." He shook his head. "I've gone hungry before. You haven't." The words weren't kind, but they weren't cold either. They were honest, the kind of honesty she'd never heard in the drawing rooms of Boston. By the third morning, the rain stopped. Mist hung low over the forest, silver and quiet. Ezra led her higher into the mountains to show her how to gather roots and mushrooms. "Get down low," he instructed. "You'll see more from the ground than you ever will standing tall." When she knelt to dig, he smirked. "See? Told you being on all fours might save your life." Penny shot him a glare, cheeks flushing. "You don't have to remind me of that." "Maybe not," he said with a rare grin, "but it worked." That day, Penny brought back a bundle of edible roots. When they roasted them together over the fire, she tasted the smoky sweetness and grinned proudly. "You did good," Ezra admitted quietly. She looked up at him surprised. "You mean that?" He nodded. "Most city folk I've met would have been dead by now. You got fight in you, Penny Ashford. Just needed to dig it out." As twilight fell and the forest glowed gold, something in her heart shifted. The fear that had once paralyzed her was gone. In its place was something deeper: respect, admiration, and an unspoken bond with the man who had forced her to crawl, to fight, and to live. That night, when he handed her his spare blanket, she smiled softly. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Ezra didn't reply, but as he turned away, his eyes lingered on her a moment longer than before, long enough to betray what his voice never would. Spring came quietly to Wildwood Mountain. The snow melted into silver streams that wound between mossy rocks, and sunlight filtered through the canopy in soft, golden sheets. Inside Ezra's cabin, life began to take a rhythm, one built on survival, silence, and something that neither of them dared to name. Each morning, Penny woke before dawn to tend the fire and prepare tea. She had learned to grind herbs, to smoke meat, and to dry berries for the long nights. Her once delicate hands were now rough and strong. The girl who couldn't strike a match now kept a fire burning through rain and wind. Ezra never said much, but he watched her. He noticed the way she hummed softly while working, the way she smiled when she finally caught her own rabbit, and the way her laughter filled the small cabin like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Your snare worked," he said one morning, as she proudly held up the small catch. She grinned. "Then maybe you won't have to save me from starvation again." He gave a low chuckle. "Don't get cocky, city girl. The woods like to humble people." Penny rolled her eyes. "Maybe they like me better than you think." Their conversations grew easier with time. She teased him. He grumbled, but never with anger. There was warmth beneath his roughness now, a familiarity that neither had expected to find in a place so wild. Still, Ezra remained a man of habit and distance. At night, he sat by the window, sharpening his knife or carving pieces of wood. Penny would sit by the fire, mending clothes or writing in the small journal she had salvaged from her ruined carriage. Sometimes she would read aloud stories of the city, of carriages and candlelit balls. "Sounds noisy," he said one evening, staring into the fire. "It was," she replied softly, "but lonely, too. Everyone pretending, no one listening." He looked at her then, the light flickering across his face. "You were listening. That's why you left." She blinked. "How did you know?" "People don't run from comfort unless they're starving for truth." Penny didn't reply. Her heart beat faster at his words, the kind of honesty that stripped away her defenses more than any danger ever could. Over the next weeks, she became indispensable. She helped mend the roof, clean the water trough, and even stitched together a new fur coat for him. Ezra, in turn, began teaching her more delicate skills, setting traps without leaving a trace, purifying water, and recognizing which plants could heal or harm. When she accidentally cut her hand on a knife, he took her wrist gently and cleaned the wound. "Keep it covered," he murmured. "It'll heal faster." His touch was careful, steady, but tender. For a man who had spent years alone, he handled her as though she might break. "Thank you," she said softly. He met her eyes, something flickering their vulnerability, maybe even fear. "You don't thank people for doing what's right." That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay listening to the crackle of the fire and the steady rhythm of his breathing across the room. The wild no longer felt dangerous. It felt alive. It felt like home. Days turned into weeks. They hunted together, built together, laughed together. Once, when a sudden storm blew open the cabin door, Ezra reached for her hand without thinking. Their fingers intertwined as lightning flashed outside, and for a moment neither of them pulled away. When the storm passed, Penny whispered, "Do you ever miss the world beyond these trees?" He shook his head. "That world took everything I had. Out here, I can breathe again." She hesitated. "And me? Do I belong in that world, or in yours?" Ezra turned toward her slowly. "You're learning to belong anywhere you choose." He said it simply, but to Penny it felt like the most profound thing anyone had ever told her. By summer, her city dresses were long gone, replaced by soft leather and woven linen she had made herself. She moved through the forest with the quiet confidence of someone reborn. The townsfolk below might never believe it. The merchant's pampered daughter now carried a bow and could start a fire with flint and patience. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the pines, Penny cooked dinner while Ezra repaired the window frame. The air smelled of pine resin and roasted meat. "You ever think you get used to this life?" he asked. She smiled. "Used to it? I can't imagine living any other way." He watched her for a long moment, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "You've changed." "So have you," she said quietly. He set down his tools. "Maybe. Or maybe I just forgot what it was like to have someone around who didn't make the silence feel empty." Penny looked away, her heart pounding. "You don't have to say things like that." "I don't say anything I don't mean." Outside, the forest whispered with wind and crickets. Inside, two people who once lived in different worlds sat side by side, closer in spirit than either dared to admit. And though neither spoke it aloud, both knew that what had begun as survival had become something far deeper, a bond forged not by comfort, but by struggle, patience, and quiet, enduring care. By late summer, peace had settled over the mountains like a gentle mist. The cabin had become more than a shelter, it was home. Penny's laughter had filled the air so long that Ezra had almost forgotten what loneliness sounded like. Almost. But the past, like a wounded animal, always finds a way back. It started when a group of trappers came through Wildwood rough men from the nearby town of Eldridge. Ezra rarely dealt with outsiders, but they stopped at his cabin one afternoon, claiming they needed directions and firewood. Penny was inside, unaware. "You've got someone else living up here?" one of them asked, noticing a woman's shawl hanging by the door. Ezra's expression hardened. Not your concern." The man smirked. "City girl, huh? Heard there's a missing merchant's daughter down in Boston. Big reward for whoever finds her. What's her name again? Penelope Ashford?" Ezra's jaw tightened. "You've said enough." The men exchanged glances. "We could all use the money, Mackenzie. Maybe we'll take a look around your place." Ezra stepped forward, his voice low and cold. "Take one more step toward that door, and I'll feed you to the wolves myself." The trappers hesitated, then backed off, muttering curses as they left, but their words hung in the air like smoke. That evening, when Penny came back from gathering berries, she found Ezra pacing the cabin, anger etched into every movement. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting down her basket. "You need to pack your things," he said without turning. "You can't stay here any more." She froze. "What are you talking about?" "Men from Eldridge were here. They know who you are. If they tell the wrong people, someone will come looking your father, bounty hunters, anyone after that reward." "So what?" Penny said, her voice trembling. "You'll just send me away, after everything?" Ezra turned sharply, his eyes full of conflict. "You don't understand, Penny. If they find you here, they'll destroy everything I've built. They'll drag you back to that life, and I can't stop them." "I don't want that life," she shouted, tears rising. "I don't want the city, or money, or those people. I want this. I want you." Her words struck like a blade. Ezra took a step back, shaking his head. "You think you do, but you don't know what it means to live like me, to be hunted, forgotten, alone." "I do know," she said quietly, "because I've been all of that, until you found me." For a moment neither spoke. The fire crackled softly between them, the air thick with what neither dared to say. Finally Ezra turned toward the door. "I'll take you to the river in the morning. From there you can follow it to Eldridge. Someone will find you." Penny felt her chest tighten. "And you'll just go back to being alone." "That's what I was before," he said simply. "It's what I should have stayed." That night Penny didn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the moonlight spill across the forest floor, the same forest that had broken and rebuilt her. Her heart ached at the thought of leaving it, and him. By dawn, she made her decision. When Ezra woke, she was gone. He ran outside, following her tracks down the path. His pulse pounded as he saw movement by the riverbank, Penny standing alone, clutching her satchel, staring into the distance. "Penny!" he called. She turned, tears glistening in her eyes. "I couldn't let you send me away. This is my home now. You're my home." Before he could answer, voices echoed from the trees. The trappers had returned, rifles in hand. "There she is," one shouted. "The Ashford girl!" Ezra's instincts took over. He grabbed Penny's hand and pulled her behind a fallen tree. "Stay down!" Bullets tore through the air. The calm of wildwood shattered in an instant. Gunfire cracked through the forest like thunder. Birds exploded from the trees as Penny crouched behind the fallen log, her heart hammering so loud she could barely hear her own breath. Ezra moved like lightning, calm, precise, deadly. He loaded his rifle with practiced ease, eyes fixed on the trees where the trappers' shouts echoed. "Stay low," he ordered, "and don't move unless I tell you." Penny clutched his arm. "They'll kill you." He looked at her, his face hard, but his voice steady. "Not today." A shot rang out. Ezra fired, and one of the men fell with a cry. The others scattered, returning fire blindly into the trees. Splinters flew as bullets tore through bark. Ezra ducked and reloaded. "They think they can hunt me in my own woods," he muttered. "Fools!" He motioned for Penny to crawl toward a patch of ferns. She obeyed, her knees scraping against the rough earth. Every breath tasted of smoke and fear. When she turned back, Ezra was gone. For one heart-stopping moment, she thought he'd abandoned her, until a scream echoed from the left. Through the mist, she saw him tackle one of the trappers to the ground, disarming him with brutal efficiency. 2 more shots fired. Silence followed. Then, out of the haze, Ezra emerged wounded, but standing, his sleeve torn and blood running down his arm. Penny ran to him. "You're hurt." He shook his head, catching his breath. "Not bad. Are you all right?" "I am now," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. Ezra looked at the fallen men and then back at her. "They won't bother us again." When they returned to the cabin, exhaustion settled over them like fog. Penny tended to his wound with trembling hands. Her touch was gentle, her eyes fierce. "You could have died," she said, voice breaking. He caught her wrist before she pulled away. "And I would have, if it meant keeping you safe." Penny's breath hitched. "You can't keep sending me away and then saving me, Ezra. You have to choose." He stared at her for a long moment, the stubborn city girl who had learned to hunt, to fight, to survive. The woman who had filled his silence with life. Finally, his voice came low, rough, certain. "I already did." And before she could reply, he kissed her fierce, desperate, and real, like a man who had finally stopped running from his own heart. The storm that had haunted Wildwood for months finally broke that night. Rain fell gently instead of violently, soaking the earth in renewal. Inside the small cabin, the fire burned steady, casting golden light across the walls, the same walls that had once sheltered 2 strangers and now held something far greater. Ezra sat by the fire, his arm bandaged. Penny stirred the pot of stew, humming softly, her voice blending with the rhythm of the rain. There was peace in that sound, a peace neither of them had known before. He watched her with quiet awe. The girl he had once barked at to get on all fours was now a woman who could track a deer, read the sky, and look him in the eyes without fear. She had become part of the mountain itself. When she handed him a bowl, he took it with a small, almost shy smile. "Never thought I'd say this," he murmured, "but I can't imagine this place without you." Penny looked at him, her expression soft, but firm. "Then don't." Ezra hesitated. "The world below will keep looking. One day someone might come again." She shook her head, her fingers brushing his. "Let them look. They won't find me, not the girl they remember. That girl's gone. This is where I belong." Outside, thunder rolled softly in the distance, a reminder that the world was still wild, still unpredictable. But inside, there was only warmth, the crackle of fire, the scent of pine and smoke, the quiet certainty of belonging. Ezra leaned back, his hand finding hers. "You're safe here," he said. Penny smiled through the flicker of firelight. "It feels like home." And perhaps, in the vast, untamed wilderness of Wildwood, that was enough. Every story has its wilderness, a place where we lose ourselves, only to find who we truly are. Penny and Ezra's tale reminds us that sometimes love isn't gentle or easy. It's raw, demanding, and born from survival. If you're listening to this somewhere out in the world, maybe under city lights, maybe beneath a quiet sky, remember this: strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through the person who refuses to give up on you. Where are you listening from tonight? Tell me in the comments. And if you still believe in love's wild kind of magic, Don't go anywhere. The next story is for you.